I'm James, I'm 34 years old, and my own father publicly banned me from our annual family vacation, only for the entire crew to welcome me aboard as the owner of the yacht. Before I tell you how his face drained of all color when he realized he was a guest on my ship, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Alright, so picture this. It's a gorgeous July morning in Marina del Rey. The kind of day California postcards are made of. The sky is an impossible shade of blue, and the sun makes the water glitter like a million scattered diamonds. The air itself smells rich, a heady mix of salt, high-grade diesel, and expensive sunscreen. And there I am, standing near the docks for the annual Wilson family yacht trip, feeling about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. For 15 years, this trip has been my dad's crowning achievement, his personal Super Bowl. He's Richard Wilson, a man who doesn't just enter a room, he conquers it. He's big, loud, and always in charge. Today is no exception. He's holding court in the center of the gathering, one arm slung around a new business partner, a guy named Henderson, letting out a booming laugh that makes heads turn. My younger brother, Thomas, the golden child, stands nearby with his new fiancée, Chloe, practically glued to his arm. He's got that infuriating smirk on his face, the one that's not about happiness, but about status. It says, "I belong here and you don't." The guests, a collection of my father's business associates and their polished wives, mingle and chat, their jewelry catching the sun. They all know who I am and they all know the score. I'm the other son, the disappointment. I can feel their sideways glances, the quick, pitying looks before they turn away. And then there's my mother, Eleanor. She sees me. I watch her smile freeze for a half second, a flash of pure panic in her eyes before she quickly looks away, suddenly fascinated by her silk scarf that doesn't need fixing. Her reaction is the silent alarm. It's my cue. My dad turns, and his eyes, sharp and dismissive, lock onto mine. The jovial mask drops. He excuses himself from Henderson and walks toward me, each step deliberate and heavy. The cheerful chatter around us dies down to a murmur. People are sensing a scene. He puts a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that looks paternal from a distance, but I can feel the pressure of his fingers digging in. It's a warning. "James," he says. His voice is low, but it cuts through the air like a razor. "I appreciate you making the effort, but your presence here would be inappropriate." He glances over at Henderson, who's now watching with open confusion. "We need to make the best possible impression. You understand." It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in a condescending package. He finished with 3 simple, brutal words. "Go home." Then he just turns his back on me, a king dismissing a court jester. The show is over. Thomas just shrugs, giving me this fake pity look that's worse than any insult. Everyone else, all these people who have known me my whole life, they suddenly find their shoes incredibly interesting. For a solid minute, I just stand there, the California sun feeling cold on my skin, the heat of public humiliation crawling up the back of my neck. My heart is pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. I take a deep breath. The salt in the air feels clean, like it's washing away years of swallowing my pride, of accepting my place. And then I start walking, not away from the dock, but straight toward the gangway of the finest yacht in the fleet, the magnificent Serenity. My dad whirls around, his face shifting from annoyance to raw fury. "James, didn't you hear me? What do you think you're doing?" I ignore him. I keep walking, my gaze fixed on the yacht. Just then, a man in a crisp white captain's uniform emerges from the top of the gangway. He's got salt and pepper hair and the calm, steady eyes of a man who spent his life on the water. He walks right past my father, who had his hand awkwardly half-raised for a handshake, and stops directly in front of me. He gives a respectful, professional nod. His voice is calm and clear, ringing out in the sudden, absolute silence. "Everything is ready for you, Mr. Wilson. Shall we get underway whenever you're ready, sir?" The silence is deafening, absolute. My dad sputters, his brain short-circuiting. "Wilson? Who in the hell is he talking to?" He's staring at me, his face a mask of disbelief. I just give a calm nod to the captain. Thank you, Captain Reynolds. Proceed as planned. I watch my father's face go through a rapid series of emotions. Confusion, anger, and then a horrifying, dawning realization that washes all the color from his face. The world he controlled, the little kingdom he ruled from this very dock every year, had just been flipped completely, irrevocably upside down. That small, sharp moment of victory at the dock faded fast, replaced by a bitter taste I knew all too well. The past isn't something you leave behind. It's a passenger that's always with you. A ghost sitting on your shoulder, whispering reminders of every old wound. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I wasn't on the polished deck of the Serenity. I was in our suffocatingly formal dining room years ago. The first memory is so clear. I was 16, and my heart was pounding with a pride I could barely contain. I'd just won the state debate championship. The trophy, a cheap gold-colored plastic thing on a marble-look base, was the most precious object I owned. I'd set it right next to my plate, hoping, praying for a crumb of acknowledgement. I argued the importance of free trade agreements on the local economy. I started to explain, my voice full of nervous energy, but I was cut off. My younger brother, Thomas, then 14, dramatically placed his own creation in the center of the table. It was a lumpy, misshapen volcano made of papier-mâché and modeling clay, with a messy orange streak down the side for lava. "Look, Dad!" Thomas beamed, his voice full of self-importance. "Third place in the school science fair. My teacher, Mrs. Gable, says I have a real gift for geology." My father put down his fork. It was like a switch had been flipped. He put on his reading glasses and studied that lumpy volcano with the intense focus of a diamond appraiser. "Outstanding, son. That's realism. You see, Eleanor? The boy has a practical mind. He understands tangible things, things you can touch. That's what builds empires." He clapped Thomas on the back, his face beaming with a pride so bright it was almost blinding. Then he glanced at my trophy. With a dismissive flick of his hand, as if shooing away a fly, he pushed it aside to make more room for the volcano. "This," he said, tapping the air where my trophy had been, "this is just talk. In the real world, James, talk is cheap. Action is what creates value. Remember that." My throat closed up. I felt a hot sting behind my eyes. I looked at my mom, a desperate, silent plea for her to say something, anything. She just gave me that weak, practiced smile and said, Now, boys, let's not let the pot roast get cold." The only person who met my eyes was my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister. She always seemed like an outsider in her own family, a gentle soul in a den of sharks. She gave me a little wink and silently raised her water glass in a quiet, secret toast. It was the only validation I got that night. That memory dissolved, and another one, sharper and more painful, took its place. This was 5 years ago. I was 29, standing in my father's opulent office. I always felt small in that room, dwarfed by the dark oak walls, the towering bookcases filled with leather-bound books he'd never read, and the framed photos of him shaking hands with politicians. I'd just spent 6 months of my life, every spare hour, every weekend, pouring my heart and soul into a business plan for my tech startup, a software platform to streamline logistics for small businesses. "It has potential, Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly with a mix of passion and nerves. "There's a massive gap in the market. I've already got potential clients lined up. All I need is the seed money to." My father leaned back in his massive leather throne, lacing his fingers over his stomach. He didn't even glance at the 50-page, meticulously researched proposal on his desk. He just looked at me with that pitying expression, the one he reserved for my hobbies. James, he sighed, drawing out my name like a lament. "Another one of your pipe dreams. Technology, software. It's all just numbers on a screen. It's not real. Too abstract. Too risky." He picked up his phone, a clear dismissal. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an important call with some real estate developers in Dubai." A week later, At our mandatory Sunday dinner, my dad cheerfully announced, "Well, I've decided to back Thomas's new venture." Again, he chuckled as if it were the cleverest thing in the world. "He's opening a French-Vietnamese fusion restaurant in Silver Lake. Brilliant concept. Who doesn't love good food?" It was Thomas's third restaurant. The first, a disastrous attempt at molecular gastronomy, had bled money for a year before closing. The second, a high-end steakhouse, had been shut down for health code violations. Each failure had cost my father a small fortune. But for Thomas, the golden child, there was always another check, another chance. For me, the door was always firmly shut. That night, I was back in my tiny, cramped rental apartment in Koreatown, staring at lines of code on my laptop screen. My father's rejection felt like a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The door opened and Rebecca, my fiancée, walked in, her arms full of groceries, her presence immediately making the small space feel brighter. She's an architect, practical and steady, the bedrock of my life. She took one look at my face, put the bags down, and wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. She didn't have to ask. She knew. "He did it again, didn't he?" she whispered into my hair. I just nodded, unable to form words. "Then we do it our way," she said, her voice firm, resolute. Without him, she was my fortress. For the next 5 years, she was the only reason I didn't give up. She saw me working 80-hour weeks, fueled by cheap coffee and a stubborn refusal to fail. She was there when I had to sell my beat-up but beloved Honda Civic to make payroll for my first employee, a good kid straight out of college named Mark. She was there when my old college roommate, David, a guy who was barely making ends meet himself, gave me a small loan of $5,000 because, as he put it, "I'm betting on you, man." He believed in me more than my own father did. She was there through the endless nights, the crushing setbacks, the moments of pure despair. And she was there when we finally landed our first major contract. I came home, exhausted but buzzing with the news, and she had a bottle of champagne. Not the cheap stuff this time, waiting. We celebrated, just the two of us, in the middle of our living room, feeling like we'd conquered the world. And she was there, sitting right next to me on our worn-out sofa, when the acquisition offer came through. $38 million from a major tech corporation. We just sat there, staring at the email on my laptop, speechless. I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost buckled me. But it wasn't pure joy. There was still this hollow space inside me, a quiet, nagging question. Now will he see me? I kept the news private, telling only Rebecca. It felt like a secret weapon, a trump card, and I wasn't sure when or how to play it. Back in the present, on the polished deck of the Serenity, I felt Rebecca's hand find mine. She laced her fingers through mine, a small, grounding gesture that brought me back from the ghosts of the past. "You okay?" she asked softly, her eyes searching mine. "I'm fine," I lied, a reflex honed over years of pretending. But I saw in her eyes that she understood everything. She knew that every fake, sycophantic compliment I was about to receive from my family would feel like another twist of the knife. She knew this was never about the money. It was about a 16-year-old kid with a debate trophy who just wanted a single nod of approval from his dad. And now that kid had bought the whole damn marina, just to finally be heard. The storm didn't begin with a thunderclap. It began with the quiet, insidious poison of a phone call 2 weeks before the trip. I was in my new office, a sleek, minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling LA skyline. It was a universe away from the cramped, cluttered apartment where my company was born. I was looking over quarterly financials, but my mind kept drifting to the upcoming family yacht trip, an event I simultaneously dreaded and, on some stupid, hopeful level, still longed to be a part of. My phone buzzed on the glass desk. The caller ID glowed. "Mom!" My heart did a little involuntary jump, a nervous flutter. "Hi, Mom," I said, consciously keeping my voice even and calm. "James, honey?" Her voice on the other end was strained, wrapped in a layer of forced cheerfulness that I knew all too well. It was her, "I have bad news, but I'm going to pretend I don't" voice. "Are you busy, sweetheart?" "Not really. What's up?" "Well, it's about the yacht trip." She hesitated, drawing out the words. This year is a bit special. With Thomas getting engaged, Chloe's lovely family is joining us. And your father, well, he's invited some very important clients from his new development project. Things are a little, well, they're just very crowded. I stayed silent, letting the unspoken words hang in the air between us. I knew what was coming. I'd been on the receiving end of this speech in various forms my entire life. Your father and I were thinking, she continued, her voice getting smaller, almost conspiratorial, as if she were letting me in on a difficult secret, that maybe it would be for the best if you sat this one out, just this year. It's purely a space issue, honey. It's nothing personal, you have to believe me. A space issue, on a 150-foot yacht that could comfortably sleep 20 guests. And their party, even with the new additions, was only 15. The lie was so clumsy, so transparent. It was almost more insulting than the truth. It assumed I was stupid enough to believe it. I understand, I said. My voice was cold, flat, betraying none of the crushing disappointment I felt. Oh, good. The relief in her voice was a palpable whoosh of air. She'd clearly been steeling herself for an argument, and my quick capitulation was a gift. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so reasonable. Your father is just under so much stress with this new deal, and he really needs this trip to go perfectly, to impress everyone. Having Thomas and his fiancée there, a happy, successful couple, it's just a wonderful image for the business. A wonderful image. And I was the blemish on their perfect family portrait. The odd one out. The variable that needed to be removed for the equation to work. I get it, Mom, I repeated, my voice now like ice. I won't be there. Thank you, James. I knew I could count on you. It means so much to your father, even if he doesn't say it. I love you. Bye, Mom. I ended the call, not returning her "I love you." The words would have felt like ash in my mouth. I set the phone down on the glass desk. My hand was shaking slightly, a tremor of pure, cold rage. I was past the hot anger. This was different. This was the quiet, chilling realization that nothing I ever did would matter. I had built a multi-million-dollar company from scratch. I had achieved the American dream. But to my own family, I was still an inconvenience, a problem to be managed and, when necessary, discarded. I sat there for a long time, just staring out at the sprawling city below. I could afford to buy anything I could see, but I couldn't buy a seat at my own family's table. The hollowness inside me felt vast. That night, I told Rebecca about the conversation over dinner on our penthouse balcony. The city lights twinkled below us like a fallen constellation. She listened quietly, her fork resting on her plate, her eyes growing darker with a second-hand anger on my behalf as I recounted my mother's words. When I finished, she put her fork down with a decisive click. "That's it," she said. Her voice was quiet but laced with steel. "I am done. I am done watching them do this to you. Your silence, your reasonableness, it doesn't earn their respect, James. It just gives them permission to keep hurting you." "What do you want me to do, Becca?" I asked, the exhaustion of a lifetime of this treatment heavy in my voice. "Start a war? Yell at them? I'm too tired to fight them anymore." "Not fight them," she said, leaning forward, her eyes intense and brilliant. "Change the game." She paused, and I could practically see the gears turning in her beautiful, strategic mind. "Remember my brother, Daniel? The one who works in commercial banking?" "Yeah," I said, not following her train of thought. "What about him?" "He told me something last week. It was just an offhand comment, but I filed it away. One of his longtime clients, a Mr. Harrison who owns Elysian Charters, is retiring. The company is profitable, but he's tired of the grind and wants to sell it quietly, without a big fuss. Daniel mentioned that Mr. Harrison owes his bank a significant favor." I stared at her, the pieces slowly, shockingly, clicking into place. Elysian Charters, the company my father chartered from. Every single year. For 15 years. Rebecca pressed on, her voice filled with a righteous conviction that was for both of us. They want to cut you out of the picture? Fine. Let's buy the whole damn picture. Stop fighting for a seat on their boat, James. Own the boat. It's time they faced a reality they can't dismiss or ignore. Not on their turf. On yours. The idea was insane. It was audacious. It was perfect. It wasn't a loud, messy confrontation that would just end in more shouting and hurt feelings. It was elegant. It was strategic. It was speaking the only language my father truly understood. The language of power, assets, and ownership. The hesitation in my eyes, the weary resignation that had lived there for so long, slowly burned away. It was replaced by a cold, hard resolve I hadn't felt before. This wasn't about seeking approval anymore. This was about reclaiming my own narrative, my own dignity. Can you set up a meeting? I asked, my voice steady for the first time that day. Rebecca smiled, a look of both love and fierce partnership in her eyes. It was a warrior's smile. I emailed Daniel while you were still on the phone with your mother, she said. He's already on it. A week later, I was sitting across from Mr. Harrison in a quiet, wood-paneled private club downtown. He was a tan, fit man in his 70s, with kind blue eyes that had seen a lifetime of sun and sea. I had expected a tough negotiation, a grilling about my finances. Instead, we just talked. I told him I'd been a passenger on his yachts, as a guest of a guest for years. I told him I admired the quality of his fleet and the professionalism of his crew. I didn't just talk about ROI or profit margins. I told him my vision, to not just maintain the legacy of Elysian charters, but to build on it. I talked about upgrading the fleet with the latest technology, improving the onboard services to an unparalleled level of luxury, and most importantly, taking care of the crew that he clearly loved like family. I told him I wanted to implement a profit-sharing program for all long-term employees. Mr. Harrison listened intently, his wise eyes studying me over his glass of iced tea. At the end of our 2-hour meeting, he reached across the table and shook my hand firmly. "Young man," he said, his voice raspy from years of sea air. "I've had plenty of rich men, hedge fund guys try to buy my company. They only see the assets on a balance sheet. You see the soul. She's all yours." The deal was done quickly, quietly, through a series of lawyers and accountants. James Wilson, the cast-off son, the pipe dreamer, was now the owner of his father's favorite playground. The storm had officially gathered, and it was about to make landfall. The 2 weeks between buying Elysian charters and the day of the trip were a blur of focused, controlled intensity. I wasn't going to be an owner in name only, a rich guy with a new toy. I needed to understand this business, to earn the respect of the people who made it run. I dove in headfirst. I spent hours with the finance teams, the marketing people, the operations managers. But the most important time I spent was down at the marina, on the docks and in the workshops. I didn't show up in a suit, announcing myself as the new boss. I showed up in jeans and a plain t-shirt, with a notebook and a genuine desire to learn. I walked through the maintenance yards, the air thick with the smell of grease and fiberglass, talking to the mechanics about the quirks of the diesel engines, asking what parts were hardest to source, what would make their jobs easier. I sat with the cleaning crews during their break, listening as they told me about the best, most eco-friendly way to treat the teak decks and polish the brass fittings until they gleamed. I wasn't giving orders. I was gathering intelligence. I was showing respect. I had a long, productive meeting with the executive chef, the formidable French woman named Isabelle. She was guarded at first, expecting me to be another clueless owner with a taste for boring, crowd-pleasing dishes. Instead of handing her a new menu, I asked her, "Chef, if you had an unlimited budget and total creative freedom, what would you serve? What is the menu you've always dreamed of creating?" Her professional mask slipped. Her eyes lit up with a creative fire. For the next 2 hours, she passionately described a 7-course tasting menu, a culinary journey through coastal France and Spain that she had been developing in her notebooks for years. I just listened, captivated. When she finished, I simply nodded and said, "Let's do it. For this upcoming trip, I want you to cook from your heart. Spare no expense. She looked at me, stunned, and then a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. I had just gained a powerful ally. The most critical person I had to win over was the captain of the Serenity, Captain Reynolds. He was an old salt, had been with Mr. Harrison for over 20 years. His loyalty couldn't be bought with a bigger paycheck. It had to be earned. One afternoon, I asked him to have a coffee with me on the bridge of the yacht. We didn't talk business. I asked him about his voyages, about the most challenging storm he'd ever weathered off the coast of Mexico, about the most beautiful, secluded cove he'd ever discovered in the Greek Isles. I just listened to his stories, showing a genuine interest in his life, his experience. Finally, Reynolds looked me straight in the eye, his gaze steady and appraising. My old boss, Mr. Harrison, he was a good man. He was a real seaman. He cared about his people more than the profit margin. I just hope that doesn't change. Captain, I said, my voice serious, meeting his gaze without flinching. I may not have your experience on the seas, but I know one thing. A company is only as strong as its people. A ship is only as good as its crew. I'm not here to change the soul of Elysian. I'm here to give it the resources to shine brighter than ever. I saw a subtle shift in the captain's gaze. The wall of professional skepticism lowered just a little. It was replaced by a grudging respect. I had passed the first, most important test. The day before the trip, I walked through the Serenity one last time. I stood in the master suite, the largest and most luxurious stateroom. I ran my hand over the cool marble of the en-suite bathroom. I thought about how my father always claimed this room, throwing his bags on the king-sized bed with an air of entitlement, as if it were his birthright. I pictured him there, and then I pictured my Aunt Carol, a woman who always made herself small to avoid causing trouble. The decision felt more right than ever. That evening, I called a brief, final meeting with Captain Reynolds in my new, still bare office at the marina. I handed him the official guest list my father's assistant had sent over. This is the passenger manifest, I said. I want to be clear. I want every one of these guests to have the absolute best experience of their lives. 5-star, world-class service. No exceptions. Reynolds nodded, his expression unreadable. Understood, sir. However, I added, sliding a printed deck plan of the yacht across the desk, I've made a few minor adjustments to the cabin assignments. I pointed to the master suite. This room will be for Mrs. Carol Sterling. Captain Reynolds raised an eyebrow, just a fraction of an inch. My Aunt Carol. He knew her from past trips. The quiet, kind sister-in-law who was always polite, always appreciative, and always treated like an afterthought by my father. And, I continued, my voice perfectly even, Mr. Richard Wilson will be in Cabin 5. Cabin 5 was a lovely stateroom by any standard, but it was undeniably smaller, tucked away in a less prestigious part of the yacht. The newly engaged couple, Mr. Thomas Wilson and Miss Chloe Vance, will require separate spaces for their privacy. It's important they have time to reflect. Mr. Wilson will be in Cabin 4, and Miss Vance in Cabin 6. I believe there was an unfortunate error in our booking system. Captain Reynolds looked at the deck plan, then up at me, and for the first time, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. He understood everything. This was no booking error. This was a carefully orchestrated rebalancing of the scales. I will personally see to it that the assignments are handled exactly as you've instructed, sir, he said, his tone carrying the faintest hint of professional conspiracy. We'll chalk it up to a systems glitch. These things happen. As I left the marina that evening, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had planted the seeds. I had set the stage. I didn't know if the performance would be a tragedy or a comedy, but I knew, for the first time in my life, that I was the one directing it. All that was left was to wait for the curtain to rise. The air at the dock, already thick with tension, became absolutely electric. Captain Reynolds's professional, deferential greeting to me hung in the space between us, an inconvenient, impossible fact that no one in my family was equipped to process. My father, Richard, was the first to break. His face, which had been smug and triumphant moments before, contorted into a mask of disbelief and fury. He strode forward, shouldering past his confused business partner. This man was used to being the sun around which all other planets orbited. To be ignored, upstaged by a mere employee in favor of the sun he just publicly dismissed, was an intolerable, unthinkable insult. "Who in the hell do you think you're talking to?" Richard snarled, not at me, but at Captain Reynolds, as if I were an irrelevant bystander to his outrage. "I am Richard Wilson. I chartered this vessel. I am paying for this trip." Captain Reynolds, a rock of professional calm in my father's emotional storm, turned to him. His voice remained even, but it held an unshakable firmness that cut through my father's bluster. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. Yes, your party booked this trip with our company, and we are delighted to have you. However, ultimate authority on this vessel, and for all of Elysian charters, rests with the owner." He gave a slight, deliberate nod in my direction. "Mr. James Wilson." Thomas let out a short, derisive laugh. It was a nervous, automatic reflex. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. James? The owner? Are you kidding me? The guy couldn't afford a decent apartment a few years ago. He probably lives in a van down by the river." My father seemed to find his footing in his favored son's dismissal. "Exactly. There's obviously been a mistake here. A serious one." He turned on me, his eyes blazing with contempt. "What did you do, James? What kind of pathetic stunt is this? Did you pay this man to put on a show? To embarrass me in front of my associates? Have you really sunk that low?" The accusations flew, each one designed to cut, to diminish, to put me back in my place. But I remained still, my calmness a stark contrast to his sputtering rage. It seemed to only fuel his fire. I didn't answer him. I knew from a lifetime of experience that arguing with my father was like shouting into a hurricane. It was pointless. Instead, I turned my attention back to the man who was actually in charge of the vessel's operations. "Thank you, Captain," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Please prepare for departure." Then, and only then, did I turn to face my family. My gaze swept over all of them, a silent accounting. I met my father's glare. I saw the sneering confusion on Thomas's face. I saw my mother's pale, horrified expression. And I saw the stunned faces of their guests, including Mr. Henderson and Thomas's fiancée, Chloe, who was watching the scene unfold with a sharp, analytical intensity. "Welcome, everyone, to the annual family trip," I said, my voice carrying easily in the quiet, expectant air. "I'm so glad you could make it, this time as my guests." I let that last word hang in the air for a beat longer than necessary. Guests. If the captain's statement was a lightning strike, my words were the thunder that followed, a deep, resonant boom that shook the very ground they stood on. My father's mouth, which had been opened to deliver another tirade, simply hung agape. Words failed him. His entire world, built on the currency of his power, his status, his name, had just been devalued to nothing in a single quiet sentence. He wasn't the host. He wasn't the king. He was a passenger. Thomas's trademark smirk was frozen on his face, looking absurd and pathetic. He looked from me to my father and back again, the cogs in his brain grinding furiously as he tried to process a reality that did not compute. The world order he'd always known, where he was the prince and I was the court jester, had been irrevocably, publicly altered. My mother brought a hand to her mouth, a gesture of pure shock. Her eyes were wide with a kind of horror. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at my father, as if she were watching a great, invincible statue crumble to dust before her very eyes. Chloe's reaction, however, was the most telling. She wasn't just shocked. She was calculating. Her sharp eyes swept over me, a rapid, cool reevaluation. The simple, inexpensive polo shirt she'd dismissed minutes ago now looked like a uniform of understated, confident power. The man she'd written off as a peripheral failure, a footnote in the Wilson family saga, was now the undisputed protagonist. She shot a quick, almost imperceptible glance at Thomas, her fiancé, and for the first time a flicker of something cold disappointment, reassessment, crossed her perfect features. But the reaction that truly anchored me, the one that meant the most, came from the one person I hadn't expected to step forward. My Aunt Carol, who usually faded into the wallpaper at these events, quietly walked past my stunned parents and stopped in front of me. She had kind, gentle eyes and a warm smile that I cherished my whole life. She didn't say a word. She just reached out and wrapped me in a tight, fierce hug. "I am so proud of you, James," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, just loud enough for only me to hear. In that embrace, in that simple, unconditional acceptance, I felt a warmth, a genuine validation that was worth more than all the money in my bank account. It was the approval I had craved my entire life, and it had come from the one person who had always given it freely, without condition. I hugged her back, just as fiercely. "Thank you, Aunt Carol," I whispered back. I stepped back and faced the stunned silence of the rest of the party. "Please, everyone, come aboard," I said, my voice now holding a calm, easy authority that was impossible to ignore or dispute. "The crew will see to your luggage. Captain Reynolds, perhaps you can inform our guests of the cabin arrangements as they board." "With pleasure, sir," the captain replied, his face a perfect mask of professional neutrality. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw a glint of what looked like satisfaction. "This way, everyone. Mr. Richard Wilson, you'll be in cabin 5. A lovely room with a view of the starboard side. Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Wilson has personally requested the master suite for you for the duration of our voyage. Mr. Thomas and Miss Vance, as I mentioned, due to an unfortunate booking error, you have been assigned separate but adjacent cabins, numbers 4 and 6. Our sincerest apologies for any inconvenience this may cause." Every sentence was a carefully aimed, perfectly delivered blow. My father turned white at being publicly displaced from the master suite. Thomas and Chloe exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated fury and disbelief. I didn't stick around to watch the rest of the fallout. I'd said and done what I needed to. I turned, my back straight, and walked up the gangway onto my yacht, leaving a fractured, bewildered family in the quiet devastation of an undeniable, irreversible truth. The main event was over, but the aftershocks were just beginning. That first dinner on the yacht was an exercise in heavy, suffocating silence. The magnificent 7-course meal prepared by Chef Isabel was served with flawless precision, but the atmosphere was thick with resentment. The only sounds were the discreet clinking of silverware against fine china and the gentle, rhythmic whisper of waves against the hull. As the host, I sat at the head of the long, polished table, maintaining a demeanor of perfect, impenetrable politeness. I made conversation with Mr. Henderson about the market, complimenting his insights. I asked Aunt Carol, who was glowing in her seat of honor across from me, about her prize-winning roses. I deliberately, meticulously, ignored my father, mother, and brother, not with overt rudeness, but with a cool, calculated indifference that was far more potent. My father barely touched his food. He sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched, his face a thundercloud. Every few minutes, he'd shoot a venomous glare in my direction, which I would meet with a calm, neutral expression before turning back to my other guests. My mother tried to spark a few meaningless conversations about the weather and the beautiful sunset, but they died out almost immediately, starved of oxygen in the tense air. Thomas, for his part, just kept drinking wine, his eyes fixed on his plate, his usual bravado completely gone, replaced by a sullen, petulant silence. My seating arrangement had worked exactly as intended. Aunt Carol, usually relegated to a forgotten corner of the table, was now the de facto guest of honor. She looked a bit flustered by the attention but also undeniably, deeply pleased. Thomas and Chloe were separated by 2 other guests, making any private, whispered scheming impossible. The tension between them was a tangible thing, a cold front that had settled over their side of the table. Later that night, long after the guests had retired to their cabins, I was standing alone on the aft deck, watching the moonlight create a shimmering silver path on the dark water. The sea air was cool and clean, I heard soft footsteps on the teak deck behind me. It was my mother. Her expensive silk wrap fluttered in the sea breeze as she approached, looking smaller and more fragile than I'd ever seen her. She didn't start with an apology. She started, as she always did, with an accusation disguised as concern. "Why, James?" she asked, her voice trembling with a chaotic mix of emotions. "Why would you do this? Why would you humiliate your father like that, in front of his business partners? You know how much pride he has. You could have destroyed a major deal for him." I turned to face her. The moonlight cast long shadows on her face, highlighting the lines of worry and fear etched around her eyes. My own voice was quiet, devoid of the anger she expected. "I was just tired." "Pride?" I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Is that what you call it, Mom? Or is it ego? He's not proud of his family. He's proud of his image. And today, for the first time, that image cracked. He's not upset about a deal. He's upset that he lost control." "It was more than that," she insisted, her voice rising. "It was cruel. It was vindictive. You've changed, James. You were never like this." A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. "I've changed." I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a painful whisper. "No, Mom. I haven't changed. I've just stopped accepting my designated role in this family. I have spent my entire life starving for a scrap of approval, a single shred of respect. I worked my tail off, I built something from nothing, with no help from either of you. And my reward for all that? A phone call telling me I'm not welcome because I might spoil the image you want to project." I looked her straight in the eye, forcing her to meet my gaze. "I spent years hoping you spoke a different language, Mom. The language of love, of support. I was wrong. The only language you and Dad seem to understand is the language of power, of assets, of control. So, I decided to finally speak your language. Am I coming through loud and clear now?" She flinched as if my words had physically struck her. Tears welled in her eyes. Tears of frustration, of self-pity, not of remorse. She turned and hurried away without another word, leaving me alone with the wind and the waves. Nothing had been resolved, but a wound that had festered in the dark for decades had finally been exposed to the cleansing salt air. A little while later, another figure emerged from the shadows of the salon. It was Thomas. He wasn't drunk anymore, just deflated. His usual smugness was gone, replaced by a raw, almost childlike confusion. He came and stood beside me at the railing, staring out at the dark, endless water. "I didn't know," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "Didn't know what, Thomas?" I asked, my own voice flat. "Any of it," he mumbled. "About the business plan, the loan from David. All of it. I just thought. That's how things were. Dad always had my back. I never really thought about why he didn't have yours." He turned to me then, and for the first time in our entire lives, I saw a genuine, unguarded question in his eyes. Was I really that bad? Was I a terrible brother? I looked at my brother, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. I didn't see my rival. I didn't see the golden child. I saw a product of a toxic system, a boy who had been so used to the path being cleared for him that he never once stopped to look at the person being pushed aside to make way. He wasn't necessarily malicious. He was just blissfully, willfully ignorant. I didn't answer him right away. I let the question hang in the salt air between us, a heavy, uncomfortable weight. Finally, I spoke, my voice neutral, holding no accusation, only a simple, undeniable truth. "Ask yourself why I had to buy an entire multi-million-dollar yacht company just to get a seat at the table with you, Thomas," I said quietly. "The answer to your question is probably in there somewhere." I gave his shoulder a light, dismissive pat, not a gesture of forgiveness but of finality, and went back inside to my own cabin, leaving him alone on the deck, under the cold, indifferent stars, forced, for the first time in his pampered life, to confront a question for which he had no easy answer. 6 months passed. The hot, dramatic blaze of summer gave way to the cool, introspective gray of a California winter. The trip on the Serenity now felt like a scene from a strange movie, but its aftershocks continued to reshape the fractured landscape of the Wilson family. Under my leadership, Elysian Charters was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I'd invested heavily in upgrading the entire fleet with state-of-the-art navigation and amenities. I introduced new, highly curated travel packages, culinary tours through the Mediterranean, diving expeditions in the Caribbean, and leveraged my tech connections to bring in a new, younger class of wealthy clientele. More importantly, I'd cultivated a work culture built on respect and empowerment. I implemented the profit-sharing plan I'd promised Mr. Harrison, and the crew responded with a fierce loyalty and dedication that translated into unparalleled service. The company wasn't just profitable. It had a renewed soul. On a personal level, things had also settled into a new, healthier rhythm. Rebecca and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony on the deck of the Serenity at sunset, surrounded only by the people who truly loved and supported us. My wonderful Aunt Carol, my first employee Mark, my old friend David who had given me that crucial first loan, and Rebecca's warm, wonderful parents, who had always treated me like a son. It was perfect. My relationships with my immediate family had fundamentally, seismically changed. I spoke with Aunt Carol weekly, our bond stronger than ever. I got the occasional, hesitant text from Thomas. After the trip, Chloe, seeing that the bank of Dad was officially closed, had called off the engagement. The fallout had forced Thomas, for the first time in his 32 years, to stand on his own 2 feet. He'd taken an entry-level job at a commercial real estate firm, a humbling experience that was slowly, painfully, knocking the entitlement out of him. Our texts were awkward, but they were a start. I barely spoke to my parents. After the trip, Richard and Eleanor had tried to revert to their old ways, to act as if nothing had happened, but the illusion of their power was shattered, and with it, their primary means of controlling the family dynamic. The chasm was too wide to ignore. One Tuesday afternoon, I was in my office, sketching out plans for expanding the charter business to include private jet services, when Rebecca called. Her tone was serious, stripped of its usual warmth. "Are you sitting down?" she asked. "I am. What is it?" "I just spoke to Daniel. He handles some of Wilson Holdings' debt," she said, referring to my father's company. "It's not good, James. A few of your dad's high-risk real estate investments in Asia went south. A major retail tenant in one of his commercial buildings pulled out. He's over-leveraged. The company is on the brink of collapse. They're facing bankruptcy." I was silent, processing the news. I didn't feel a rush of victory. I didn't feel joy or schadenfreude. I didn't even feel sadness. I just felt a profound emptiness. The empire my father had spent his life building, the one he had sacrificed his own son's well-being for, the one he used as a shield and a weapon, was crumbling under the weight of his own arrogance. "It's his own doing, James," Rebecca said gently, reading my silence. "He got reckless. He always believed he was too big to fail." "I know," I said quietly. As I expected, my phone rang late that afternoon. The caller ID glowed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Richard Wilson. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "James." His voice on the other end was hoarse, stripped of its usual booming authority. Sounded thin, fragile. There was a weariness to it, a desperation I had never heard before. I need to talk to you." We met at a quiet, anonymous coffee shop in a strip mall halfway between my office and his home. It was neutral ground. My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 6 months. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame, and the aura of invincibility that had always surrounded him was gone, replaced by a gray cloud of defeat. He didn't beat around the bush. He laid it all out. The bad investments, the lost contracts, the crushing, insurmountable debt. Then he looked at me, his eyes bloodshot, and I saw a look I had never seen from him in my entire life. A raw, desperate plea. "I need a loan, James," he said, his voice barely a whisper, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "A bailout, a significant one, just to get through this crisis. You're my only hope." This was it, the moment of ultimate reversal. The moment I had subconsciously been waiting for my whole life. The power was entirely, absolutely mine. I could be the savior. I could write a check and, in doing so, make him my debtor, forever beholden to me. I could make him acknowledge my worth, make him grovel. I could perpetuate the same toxic cycle of control, using money as a weapon, just as he had always done to me. The temptation was immense, a dark, satisfying pull. I looked at my father's hopeful, desperate face, and I saw another path, a harder path, a better one. No, I said, my voice soft but firm. My father's face hardened, a flash of his old, arrogant self returning. No? After everything I've done for you, after the life I gave you. What life did you give me? I interrupted, my voice still quiet, but now laced with an unbreakable steel. You taught me that love is conditional. You taught me that a man's worth is measured by his bank account. You taught me that it's acceptable to sacrifice one son's happiness for the other's ego. I shook my head, a sense of finality washing over me. I won't save your company, Dad. That's your legacy. The mistakes were yours, and you have to face them. The desperation in his eyes curdled back into a familiar, sputtering anger. So that's it? You're just going to let me fail? Just to get your revenge? This isn't revenge, I said. And I realized with a startling clarity that it was true. The desire for revenge had burned out, leaving something cleaner in its place. I took a deep breath before making my final offer, extending an olive branch on my own terms, in a language he had never learned to speak. I won't give you money, but if you want, this Sunday we can go fishing. Just the two of us, on a small, rented boat. No business talk, no talk about the past. Just fishing. My father stared at me, dumbfounded, his mind unable to compute the offer. He had expected a negotiation, a lecture, a triumphant "I told you so," or a bitter refusal. He had not expected this. An offer of time, not money. An offer of connection, not a transaction. He didn't answer. He just shook his head in disbelief, stood up, and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone with my cold coffee and the quiet, unshakable certainty that I had finally, truly broken free. 3 months later, on a cool, overcast Sunday morning, I drove to a small public dock in Long Beach. This place was a world away from the glitz and glamour of Marina del Rey. It smelled of salt, fish, diesel fumes, and the damp, earthy scent of the low tide. I parked my car and walked down the creaking wooden pier, where an older man was waiting for me, holding 2 simple fishing rods. My father looked thinner, smaller. His hair seemed more white than gray now. His company had officially filed for bankruptcy a month prior. He had lost everything: the high-rise office, the country club memberships, the respect of his peers. Everything except the family home, which my mother, in a rare act of foresight, had ensured was in her name alone. We didn't say much as I helped him prep the small, 16-foot aluminum boat I'd rented for the day. The silence between us wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind that had plagued us on the yacht. It was awkward, clumsy, like 2 strangers who share a complicated history trying to learn how to simply be in the same space. We motored out from the shore, the coastline and its troubles shrinking behind us until the city was just a faint, hazy outline on the horizon. I cut the engine and dropped the anchor. The only sounds were the gentle lap of the waves against the boat's hull and the lonely call of a distant seabird. We baited our hooks and cast our lines into the calm, gray water. For a long time, maybe an hour, we just sat there watching the tips of our fishing rods. It was peaceful. Then my father spoke, his voice raspy, directed not at me but at the water. "Your Aunt Carol," he began, his eyes still fixed on his fishing line. "She called me last week. She said you're a better man than I am." I didn't respond. I didn't want to break the fragile truce with a clumsy word. I just waited, my heart suddenly still. "She was right," he added. It was almost a whisper, a puff of air carried away by the sea breeze. It wasn't a grand, tearful apology. It didn't magically erase decades of hurt and neglect. Couldn't. But it was something. It was a crack. A tiny crack in the lifetime of ego and pride he had built around himself like a fortress. I took a deep, steadying breath, tasting the salt in the air. I looked at my father, really looked at him, not as the titan who had cast a long shadow over my life, but just as a man. An old man, a failed man, a man who was trying to find his way through the wreckage of his own making. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the familiar sting of resentment or the burn of anger. I just felt a flicker of something quiet, something that felt a lot like compassion. I realized in that moment that the real victory wasn't when Captain Reynolds called me owner. It wasn't buying the company or stunning my family into silence. The real victory was this moment, right here on this little boat, in the middle of a vast gray ocean. It was the ability to choose connection over conflict, to choose a quiet moment of healing over a loud moment of revenge. I didn't need to own the yacht to prove my worth. I just needed to learn how to be the captain of my own soul. Maybe we'll catch the big one next time, Dad, I said quietly, breaking the long silence. My father turned and looked at me, and for a fleeting instant under the gray sky, I saw a small smile touch his lips. It wasn't his old, booming, confident smile. It was something new, something small and real. Maybe we will, son, he replied. Maybe we will. Out on the open water, under a vast and forgiving sky, a new day was dawning. Not with a bang, not with a triumphant explosion, but with a quiet, simple, and hopeful promise. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to completely change the rules of the game to be seen and respected? I'd love to hear about it. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.